+4. Check, check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hello. Hello. Check 1, 2. Do we have anything going there? Check 1, 2. Are we ready? Hello. Yeah, we got. Okay. Good.
You good? I didn't see any meter going on.
Hello. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, but we need meters coming out. Oh. Yeah, you should have. Okay.
From the land to the lab, the University of Alberta is working on incredible advancements, leading with purpose to feed the world. Our game-changing innovations are at the heart of a food sustainability revolution, finding ways to produce more food, use less energy, and strike a better balance between our economy and our environment. We're crushing clubroot disease in canola, introducing new resistance genes, and training the next generation of plant scientists to join the fight against this damaging pathogen that puts thousands of fields at risk across the prairies. Our graduates have gone on to answer the global demand for high-value protein with new technology in cellular agriculture and beyond, including an unprecedented solution to making lab-grown meat up to 10,000 times cheaper than the current option. We're leading the way in beef genomics, rangeland research, and cattle nutrition, proving that producing quality beef cattle while protecting grasslands and saving money is possible and critical for advancing the economic, environmental, and social sustainability of Canadian beef. And we're looking to feed the world faster with our accomplished wheat breeding program, designing multiple new varieties with better disease resistance and stronger earlier yields, vital for the Western Canadian and Alberta economies. This is the University of Alberta. This is how we're changing the world. This is how we're leading with purpose.
That was a great way to start. And thank you very much, everyone, for being here. My name is Peggy Garritty, and I have the great privilege of serving as the Chancellor for the University of Alberta. On behalf of my colleagues at the University of Alberta Senate, welcome to the Chancellor's Forum. The forum was established in 2018 to invite the public to campus to engage with a timely topic related to the University of Alberta. And this evening's topic certainly is timely. In fact, it's critical to Alberta's future and the future of the world. Whether you're joining us in person through the live stream or watching the recording at a later date, thank you all for joining us. I also want to give a special hello to those joining us at a watch party at our campus, Augustana campus in Camrose. Welcome to all of you there. Tonight's topic is food for the future, and we cannot talk about food without talking about land. This land has been a gathering place for centuries. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory and the homelands of the Métis. In stating this, we must recognize our responsibility to work in relationship alongside First Nation and Métis people and their communities on our way forward, and in good relations in uplifting the whole people for the next 7 generations and the university for tomorrow. To acknowledge the traditional territory is to recognize its longer history, reaching beyond colonization and the establishment of European colonies, as well as its significance for the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live on this territory, and whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the land and its other inhabitants today. That relationship to the land is central to Indigenous cultures, and we have much to learn from their practices, their teachings, and their experiences in safeguarding land for generations. I invite you to think about those teachings where land is considered a relation. It's part of our extended family, and it's something we have a sacred responsibility to address as we make decisions about the future of food. With this in mind, I want to briefly highlight that the University of Alberta is part of the Aramat project, which brings together more than 150 Indigenous organizations and governments working with researchers from around the world to examine the links between the loss of biodiversity and the decline in Indigenous health. I'm also conscious of the fact that we're meeting this evening while people around the world are together in Egypt at COP27, addressing the very real and dramatic impacts of climate change. Our own President, Bill Flanagan, is there, presenting on the contributions universities like ours can make to global climate change efforts, and I'll be anxious to hear his thoughts when he returns. Regardless of what we might hear or read about the outcomes of COP27, climate change must be front and center in the research we conduct, the actions we take, and the decisions we make to secure the future sustainability of food for people around the world. This Chancellor's Forum is an opportunity to learn more and share perspectives. We're joined by 6 remarkable individuals who will help us to unearth this topic. Thank you for those who sent questions in advance when you registered. We shared your questions with our moderator and our panelists to inspire and craft tonight's panel discussion. When you leave tonight, I hope you feel motivated to continue the conversation with your family, friends, and networks. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the Faculty of Agricultural Life and Environmental Sciences, our AILS people, for partnering with Senate on this latest Chancellor's Forum. I will say that Stan Blade and I have been planning this event for more than 2 years, and we're just so thrilled we finally have a chance to have it. I also want to thank the graduate students who joined us prior to the event and shared their research in our pre-event reception. From the Faculty of AILS, thank you to Keisha Hallman and to Anissa Armit. And from the School of Public Health, thank you, Maricruz Barbara Gonzalez, and to Tara Pombert. I'm also deeply grateful to our panelists and the moderator for their time and contributions for tonight's event. And I'd like to invite you to come up and take your chairs, please. Thank you. Our moderator, I'm going to hand it over to you right away, Honorable Paula Simons. Paula is an independent senator representing Alberta in the Senate of Canada. A graduate of the University of Alberta and of Stanford University, she is the deputy chair of the Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry. Before being named to the Senate in October 2018, she had a 30-year career as an award-winning investigative reporter, political columnist, feature writer, and documentary maker. And for us, she moderated the first ever Chancellor's Forum back in March of 2018. Please join me in welcoming Senator Simons and our panelists. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Garritty. Now, I want to make certain, because I am wearing a mask, and I make no apologies for that, but I want to make certain that everybody can hear me. All right, I swear I will articulate to the best of my ability, so you will hear every consonant. I'm very pleased to be back here in Amiskwaciy-Waskahagan, where we are all treaty people. Je suis tellement heureuse d'être ici avec vous ce soir to talk about the future of food. It is a pressing question in the face of climate change and drought and flood, of COVID-triggered disruptions in global supply chains, in the face of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where prices at the grocery store are faced with an inflation that's not been seen for a generation. Add to that our concerns about greenhouse gas intensity of industrial agriculture, the social and ethical concerns about the raising and consumption of animals for meat, fundamental concerns about the health of the soil itself, topped off with ongoing concerns about the economic viability of the traditional family farm. Those are some of the themes we're going to be exploring tonight, looking at the opportunities for technology, investment, innovation, and pure science, where they can prepare us as Albertans for the challenges ahead. And I am delighted to introduce to you our remarkable panel. Alison Sundstrom is an inventor, an investor, and a venture capitalist. She's a fellow and founding partner of the Creative Destruction Lab and CEO of ConserveX, a Canadian company developing and investing in emerging technology in agriculture. She's also a general partner of the 51 Food and the Ag Tech Fund, and was named last year as one of the 50 most influential people in Canadian agriculture. This is Allison. Dr. Bill Shostak holds the Bocock Chair for Agriculture and Environment at the University of Alberta. His research revolves around the most fundamental of agricultural inputs, soil and water, their importance for the environment, and the impact of human activities upon these most important resources. That's Bill. Dr. Ellen Goddard is an agricultural economist, the former cooperative chair in agriculture marketing and business, past president of the Canadian Agricultural Economic Society, and a distinguished fellow with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, with a special interest in genomics and the impact of agricultural policy on consumer and producer behavior. Isha Datar was born in Saskatoon, raised in Edmonton, and is an alumna of the University of Alberta. Isha is the executive director of New Harvest, a not-for-profit research institute advancing cellular agriculture, or food grown from cells. She has co-founded 2 unicorn companies. She did not raise unicorns, I'm sorry to tell you, but their unicorn companies made milk and egg protein without cows or chickens. And she says she aims to ensure that cellular agriculture happens in Canada and not to Canada. And finally, Glazy De Silva is an assistant professor in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Science here at the University of Alberta. She holds the BCRC Hayes Chair in Beef Production Systems, and her research focuses on beef cattle nutrition, management, and stress reduction, looking at ways to raise healthier and more sustainable herds. Welcome to all of our guests, and welcome to all of you. So Ellen, I'm going to start by putting you on the spot because you're closest to me. In the wake of the supply chain shocks caused by COVID, by climate change, and by the war in Ukraine, I think a lot of Canadians and a lot of Albertans are realizing how much we've taken our food security for granted. As an economist and as someone who's studied the sociology of food production, how do you think the events of the last 2 years have changed our perspective on the future of food and food security?
Well, the first thing I think you've already said is that right from the beginning of COVID, it was a shock to everybody. It wasn't only toilet paper that wasn't in the grocery stores. The reality was for most people, that had never entered their mind, that they would have the opportunity of going to the grocery store and not finding food. People coped in incredible different ways. But one of the ways was a bigger interest in local food and direct contact with farmers and finding out what goes on the farm, which has spilled over to sustained interest in more sustainable production practices and looking for why things are the way they are and why the foods that we look at appear in the grocery store. My own research would suggest that we're actually more tolerant of technology and food now because people have realized that it's not going to be automatic for the rest of your life that every single foodstuff is going to appear on the grocery store shelves in exactly the same format. So people are now willing to try things that they might have been a little bit more opposed to before.
That's interesting. Now, Bill, Alberta is blessed with 2 remarkable natural resources, our soil and our water. And I think a lot of people have also taken those things for granted for a long time. So what do we have to do to ensure that we have the healthy soil and water we need for our agricultural future here?
I'm really not sure what we need to do.
Oops.
I wish I did. I wish I did. It's really not new that our soil is important. If I can quote Thomas Jefferson, who pointed out that civilization itself rests upon the soil. And so soil is the basis for 95% of our agricultural production, but it's also important for forestry. And it's home to most of the world's biodiversity. The organic matter in the soil is helping to stabilize a global climate system. I mean, it's a carbon reservoir. thanks to plants, and it's also a water reservoir, and it's a water filtration system. And given the importance of soil, I think of it as our third most important natural resource. First one is oxygen. Just try holding your breath for a little while to see how important oxygen is. And then water, and then soil. So we've known how important it is. I don't know how else to say it. It's really what sustains us.
Now, Glaze, you come from Brazil, and you've made your career now in Alberta, two places where cattle is king, and where beef production is part of cultural identity. At a time when climate change and drought are putting more and more pressure on our grasslands, which are such important carbon sinks, how does our culture of beef production need to evolve to prepare for this climate changed future?
Yeah, just to give a little bit of context, when we talk about beef production, we are talking about contributing to feed the world, right? Like beef is really important to deliver nutrients to the population. So when we talk about beef production, many of us can think just as cows and meat, which is already great, but when we talk about beef production, it's way beyond this. We are talking about human nutrition, right? We are talking about food security. We are talking about ecosystems, biodiversity, wildlife, our earth, and how cattle is important to sequester carbon through the grasslands, as you mentioned, and how cattle is important to maintain those grasslands that unfortunately we have been losing throughout the years. So both Brazil, I also got my degrees in the United States. So both Brazil, United States, and Canada, when I think about beef production, we need also to think about the livelihoods of the farmers who are working with beef production, and all of that beef production represents to the economics and so on. So beef production, it's really important to address many topics that goes beyond food production. It's sustainability, and it's challenging. We have seen many things on the news about how beef production is contributing to methane emissions, for example, but there is a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation that is behind beef production, which is much more helpful and beneficial to the world than it's harmful. And I'm really proud of the industry, how the industry is moving forward, especially the Canadian beef industry, how it's working to minimize those negative effects, and it's fighting through climate change because it can impact production, right? Like, for example, last year we had a really bad drought, and impacted food prices for cattle, hay prices, and so on. So the challenge is there. We need to find solutions to keep fighting climate change, because we cannot just think on the future, but also on the present. We are already facing some of those consequences, and the needs are for today. So yeah, there's a lot we have to talk about.
Now, Isha, your work is literally redefining the way we think about beef and about the way we consume animal protein. We hear a lot of chatter, I don't want to say in the media, because I was the media for 30 years, but there's lots of stories in the news about test tube steaks. But tell us, how real is this technology, and how might it work?
It is very real. So I learned about the idea that we could grow meat from cells here at the U of A 2009 in a meat science class that is now taught by someone sitting in the audience today. And back then it was very much theory. It was this idea that, if really what we want is a boneless, skinless chicken breast, why not grow the muscle tissue rather than grow beaks and feathers and all these kinds of things? And in the years since that class, this field has grown to secure like literally billions of dollars of investment, hundreds of companies around the world who believe that growing food from cells is a really important part of our food strategy in a climate change world. And it's really looking at how we can find resilience in our food system by building diversity into it. If you think about how much land we dedicate to farming animals in the earth, it's about 1/3 of our planet. That's kind of the only system we have right now for producing animal products. To me, it's kind of similar to how we needed to transition energy from one kind of dirty, dangerous type of energy, coal, into many more alternatives. And so to me, part of the plan going forward is how can you grow more foods in different ways, and growing meat from cells is one of those ways. But it's not just meat. Even more real than meat from cells are things like dairy proteins or egg proteins or kind of other food types that would traditionally come from animal that is grown by a different cell type.
Yeah, and you have actually brought to market, right, dairy products. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so I helped co-found some companies, but have since walked away from them to focus more on the nonprofit side, because I think that this idea is so much bigger than what one company can do, so much bigger than what 100 companies can do. It is really like a gigantic paradigm shift in a new industry and a new ecosystem. But that company that I helped co-found a long time ago, Perfect Day Foods, does have products on the market, cream cheese, ice cream, yogurts, milk, that is made from whey protein that was created by a recombinant microorganism instead of from a cow.
Wow.
So yes, you can buy that if you're in the States, not here yet.
Now, Allison, you're the venture capitalist. What does it take to get innovations like these and make them real, to get them to market? And how does Alberta prepare itself to compete in this new world of agricultural innovation?
Thank you, Chancellor, and thank you, Senator, for the invitation today. I'm so excited about the potential for agriculture across the board. I had the great fortune to participate with University of Alberta researchers, some who are in the room today. We took our technology around the world, and it demonstrated to me the potential to actually grow companies from Alberta everywhere. And Senator, the opportunity in agriculture is probably one of our largest opportunities. We are an 8 trillion industry that is going to grow over the next years to an almost 12 trillion industry. And we can transform and be the most sustainable industry that really is not just looking to drive to net zero, but can be a sink. And so I'm very excited about this, and I love being on this panel because it crosses everything from soil to cattle. And having spent my life in the livestock industry, I'm very supportive of livestock. They are the world's greatest upcyclers. They can eat things that we cannot eat as humans, and they can convert to a sustainable protein. Now, we do have to look at our industry, frankly, and we do have to make some change. But at the same time, what Isha is speaking about is just hugely exciting. Over the next 30 years, we are going to reimagine everything we have, from food to materials. We will be growing leather through the use of mycelium. But what it's going to take is money. It takes an investment both in research and development, but it also takes us as consumers to buy product that fit our sustainability desire. And it also takes us to understand that as a community, Canada is a very small country.
Yeah. And a small economy.
And we can't rely on government. We must have investment. We must have a very healthy ecosystem. And the healthy ecosystem goes from philanthropy through to venture capital. And I became a venture capitalist because I couldn't believe why they wouldn't invest in me. So I had to figure out how do you actually create venture capital in Canada. And I'm pleased to say I think that we're building a much more stimulating economy for investors to be here, and it largely resides in universities. We have so much talent in our universities. We must fund it, and we must bring our inventions to market. So that's why I'm so very excited, and thank you for the invitation.
So then, Bill, that segues to a question I have for you. We've been talking about things when you weren't here. Sorry, for those who are only listening to this after the fact, I meant we've been talking amongst ourselves without the audience. And one of the things, Bill, that you highlighted when we were speaking earlier is the challenge of getting funding in the academy, funding for pure science research, funding for universities at a time when it seems that public dollars for universities are being squeezed all the time. What kind of work do we need to do to ensure that we have the robust support we need for academic research on our campuses?
You're very good at asking me questions I can't answer. I really don't know. I will make a confession here. When I was a graduate student many, many years ago, I was young and naive. I wrote a letter to, sent it to every daily newspaper in Canada, 144 newspapers at the time, about underfunding of research. At that time, we were spending about half as much per capita, as countries like Germany and Switzerland. And here we are 40 years later, and we're actually in the same place. And I think part of the problem in Canada, I know it's a terrible thing to say that it's a problem to be living in probably the richest country in the world, where we literally have every possible mineral resource and fossil fuels and agricultural land and water resources and so on. So we don't have to think as much as other people do. For example, in Switzerland, where they don't have all those resources. So I can only say how important it is to have funding for research. I was very fortunate. 2/3 of my career was spent working either in Switzerland or in Germany, and it's a completely different culture. They have a science culture, and they understand the importance of funding research. And I'm thrilled about the work that my colleagues are doing and what Alison had to say about the importance of funding the research, but also looking at other ways to fund the research. So I think just knocking on the door at the federal government, I don't think that's the answer, because we've been knocking at the door for a long time, and whoever's on the other side of the door just hasn't heard.
Yeah.
Can I pop in on that?
Yes, yes, please do.
So I think that we need to stop thinking about funding research, because research is just part of the pipeline of all the things that we need to see change and happen. And Alison and I are both on the National Synthetic Biology, the National Engineering Biology Committee or something like that.
National Bioengineering Council of Canada.
Whatever it's called. Anyway, Alison said something that stuck with me many, many months ago, maybe even years ago, where she said, the bioeconomy that we want to build doesn't need funding, it needs financing.
Yes.
And I love that phrase because it shows that it's not just funding for research for these first projects, it's the funding for the research for the first project so that they can be kicked off and become the things that actually change the world and affect the world and create more sustainable ways to feed people. So I just wanted to bounce in there a little bit, is the research is just step one.
Yeah. So Ellen, I want to take Isha's project as a kind of a case study. I mean, when you're describing it, Isha, it sounds like something right out of Star Trek with the replicator. But Ellen, you've spent a long time studying consumer behavior, producer behavior in response to genomic research, which is, people were already worried about frankenfoods. But what do you think it will take to convince consumers and industry to embrace something as futuristic as meat or cheese cultured in the lab?
So the interesting part of that is that some of the industry groups that I've worked with say, cattle breeders, for example, or pig breeders, are worried about the use of some genetic technologies because they're already anticipating that there could be a consumer backlash. So there has been a cycle going on where perhaps some things that should have been introduced to the market and could have been alleviating some of the public concerns have not been introduced because of risk aversion. And that's potentially a problem. One of the things that all of this stuff is based on is how much trust you have. Trust in the people that create the products, trust in the people that are going to sell you the product, trust in the government to regulate the products. And we can shake that trust very, very easily. And somehow, BSE shook some trust when it happened, particularly in Europe, more so than in Canada. But that made us think maybe the government wasn't on top of all of this stuff and created some other uncertainties. The reality is, though, that it's always a trade-off. And people need to understand that there is a trade-off. And because of COVID and some of the shortages that we continue to see, and certainly because of the price inflation that is affecting everybody viscerally at the moment, I'm not suggesting for a fact that Canadians are the worst off globally because of price inflation for food, because we're lucky compared to lots of other countries where it's much more devastating. But when these things and these uncertainties creep in, then you start looking for ways that you could achieve these similar products at similar cost, hopefully, but maybe in ways that are not as traditional as what you thought you needed to have.
Yeah.
Food is, by the way, a very emotional, cultural, historical thing. We have a tendency to like to eat things the way our grandparents ate them, and maybe now we're going to have to move past that because maybe we've lost some of those opportunities.
Yeah. You know, I think back when you're talking about bovine spongiform encephalopathy. I remember, because I was a journalist covering the BSE crisis, I remember I got a phone call from the Japanese consulate. And when I spoke to the consul general, he said, I don't understand. He said, in Japan, the moment they discovered that they had BSE, everybody stopped eating beef. And he said, here in Alberta, you ate more beef. And I said, well, it's because it's so much a part of our cultural identity as Albertans. I mean, I remember I never ate more steak than I did that summer.
Yeah, we bought ground beef that I think sat in some people's freezers for years because we brought more than we could possibly eat to support the industry.
Yeah. And yet, Glacy, I mean, we are in cattle country. At the same time, there is a rising global concern about animal welfare, animal rights, and pushback to the idea of taking animals to slaughter. So do you think there will always be a market demand for beef? And if so, what do we need to do to make its production more humane and more environmentally efficient?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just when we see, for example, methane contribution from agriculture globally, and then we compare that to Canada, averages are kind of unfair, right? Because methane emissions, for example, can change a lot depending on what cattle consumes, right? Like how they are managed, breed, age, and how long it takes to finish a cattle, and so on. So for example, if we go to some parts of the world that takes longer, for example, to finish cattle, or cattle has not that good genetics, or the forage those animals are consuming are not good, that can increase methane emissions in the area. But here in Canada, there is a lot that has been done with the support of research, science-based information. And I think from the 1981 to 2011, we have reduced methane emissions for cattle by 15%. So it's a lot, and that was an effort that was done by the industry because there was adoptions of practices that were recommended by researchers, for example, and in terms of improving genetics of the herd, nutrition, reproductive efficiency of those animals, health. Producers, they know that to produce, to be efficient, cattle needs to be healthy, right? The soils need to be healthy. Our grasslands need to be healthy. So that is this understanding. But there is still a goal. There is more to be done, right? We still need to produce more with what we have. We know population is growing. We are losing space for agriculture, for example. There is this urban expansion. So there is less people who want to work in agriculture. Many people, they want to go back to go to the city, for example, and they don't want to work in agriculture, and that's an issue. So we need to be more efficient to use less water, for example, less land, and have these cattle being more efficient. So it is not that easy. I think, for example, the more efficient we are, the less window we have for improvements, right, compared to places where we have a lot of things to improve already. But the goal is to keep trying, right, to improve grazing management, to keep improving herd selection, to find animals more efficient, traits that are more efficient for cattle to consume more and gain less. And gain more. So there is opportunities for research, things to do, and also in collaboration with other places to try to get the world average down, and ours even more lower.
So Bill, you complained about the last two questions. So let's see if we can make you happier with this one. We've been talking about technology and technological advancement and sort of cutting edge agriculture. But some of your research is at the other end of the spectrum, looking at the mineral content of traditional indigenous foods, country foods, whether that's Saskatoon berries or beaver loin. So when you're looking at the nutritional values of those foods, what do you find, and do you think that they have a future as something that Albertans can develop and take to market?
Yeah, so just for a little bit of background, so my laboratory at the U of A is sort of a dream come true. It's called the Swamp Laboratory for studying trace elements in soil, water, air, and plants. We don't actually study manure, but we needed an M in that name. But it's a metal-free, ultra-clean laboratory. And one reason why I moved back to Canada from Germany is what I'd been hearing about the heavy metal pollution from the oil sands industry in northern Alberta. And what I'd been hearing just did not add up if you understand anything about geology and bitumen chemistry. So we started doing work in the lower Athabasca River watershed. And part of what we do is we monitor atmospheric deposition or study atmospheric deposition using sphagnum moss from peat bogs, because they get their inputs exclusively from the atmosphere. And while we were out there sampling, I was looking at all the wild berries, and I said, well, let's analyze those too, just to see. And absolutely fascinating. The berries are just full of essential micronutrients like manganese and iron and copper and nickel and zinc. And what's even more remarkable scientifically, and this is where the basic research comes in, the stuff that you do just out of curiosity, peat bogs are the most copper deficient soils on the planet, and the berries are full of copper. So how do they get their copper? And all of the berries that we've analyzed, it doesn't matter if they're cranberries, blueberries, whatever, lingonberries, they all have about the same amount of copper. So the plant must have a way of regulating copper uptake, I guess, with a mycorrhizal association and so on. So absolutely fascinating. And this led us to look at other wetland plants that are important to indigenous people. So Labrador tea, which is an important medicinal plant, rat root. Labrador tea is full of manganese. And it's probably an important dietary source of manganese if you drink Labrador tea. And then I was motivated to analyze beaver tissue. And absolutely fascinating. So I didn't realize, of all the game meats, beaver is actually the most nutritious. So highest in protein, lowest in fat. And so again, micronutrients, literally, I'm talking about the micronutrients that are required for human health. So we require chromium and nickel and copper and zinc and iron and manganese and selenium. And the beaver was rich in all of that. And the trapper that I got to know, he asked me if I'd want to try some barbecued beaver loins. And how many people have tried barbecued beaver loins? Put up your hands. No hands.
There are no hands.
No hands, okay. Turns out, most delicious meat I've ever had. And the beaver population has really made a comeback. The beaver was almost wiped out, if you know the history of the fur trade. We now have them in downtown Toronto. There's beavers in downtown Toronto. And I know in Europe, they've reintroduced the European beaver, and in Central Europe, the beaver is really making a comeback. Well, that can be a problem if you have a fruit orchard, because guess what? Beavers eat trees. So now in parts of Central Europe, like in Poland, they're considering harvesting beavers as a source of meat. So for our indigenous people that have been concerned about their diet, I'm just looking at these micronutrients. And I think fish and berries and wild game, that's a very healthy diet. And I think we should be doing the basic science that we need to do to really understand the nutritional value of these foods, and hopefully giving indigenous people the confidence that they need in the food that's literally right there around.
Can you imagine we killed all those beavers and made hats out of them? We wore them instead of eating them, which tells you where our priorities were, I guess. Now, Allison, we're having this conversation set against the backdrop of COP27. There's so much criticism of some of our traditional agricultural practices, from the way we use nitrogen fertilizer to the way we rely on irrigation in the Palliser Triangle. And it's always seemed to me that, I mean, I am not a venture capitalist, but if I had money to invest, I would be leery of investing it until I got a really clear signal that we were serious about climate change. So what do we need to do to send investment capital the market signal that we're serious about making these transitions that we need to make?
So I think that venture capital is kind of a recent creation. It really was founded in about mid-90s, and it's really a nascent investment vehicle. But what I'm really fascinated by is the conversation here today. We need to invest in fundamental research, but we need to be investing in the future. If we're investing in the past, we've already been there. So the future is looking at a number of things, and we've got a really big challenge ahead of us. You know, we're talking about some very kind and nice things, but our challenge is huge. And I had a gentleman at an event that I spoke at said, we are 9 meals away from anarchy. Now, I thought that was a little bit far out there, but I started thinking about it. And if our supply chains break down, we've seen it during pandemic, we've seen things, how are we going to, from 1960 to now, we produced double the food. We also impacted the planet. What we did was amazing, and it was science-driven. It was just amazing, but we did have an incredible impact on the planet. So now we have to face the fact we've done this damage. We've probably created, it's the Anthropocene. We have probably created more planetary damage than we could reverse. So going forward for our next generation, we have to change that. We have to face the fact on certain industries we have that impact, and we have to do things differently. The only way we're going to do things differently is through creative disruption. we're also going to, it's innovation. So we need every scientist, every biologist, every geneticist, every soil scientist, every beaver scientist, everything that we can possibly deploy. We need that to solve our problems. We also have to make sure we don't put the burden of our change on our farmers. And that's a really big concern for me. So I'll bring up another point. Along with creative disruption comes creative financing. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. We need venture capital investing in the future. We need it to be more inclusive. And that's my involvement with the 51. We have to look at gender inclusivity. We have to look at diverse founders. Silicon Valley, just for a little stat for you, Silicon Valley only invests about 3% in women-founded companies. They spend even less on diverse founders, so entrepreneurs of color. So if we're only investing in those that look just like us, we're going to end up with a society that looks just like that culture. So we do have to start investing more inclusively. But creative financing comes from, let's take our philanthropy, which Isha is. She is a philanthropist. She took her involvement out of Perfect Day and is now reinvesting that into companies. And so I think that is an area where we can see people investing in philanthropy. But we also have to go through all the way to pension funds. And if you, just a little statistic for you, pension funds in Canada are about 15% of our wealth, and that is about $3 trillion. I like numbers that start with T. And so what we should be doing is making sure that our pension funds and the things that we invest in are investing in the world that we want to see. And so let's be the change. Let's make the investment. Our business expenditure on research and development is less than Slovenia. Slovenia, lovely country, but definitely not the economic power that we have or the resource power that we have. So we need to start investing in innovation, and maybe we need to use some very sophisticated tax levers and other levers that if you invest in new technology, you invest in research, you get some kind of tax credit back. So I think it really comes down to we're an agricultural nation, we must invest in it, we must protect it, and we must be sustainable.
I mean, Isha, you are doing,
Can I just say?
yeah, I just
The poorest philanthropist ever. I'm not a philanthropist. I just run a nonprofit organization. But the philanthropy part of it kind of happened in the work of the philanthropy. But people are always surprised that New Harvest has never really had like a benefactor. It's never been funded by a billionaire that was like, go and do this kind of thing. It's always been funded by a lot of grassroots donations, and there have been some wealthy people that have supported it too. But the reason why I focus on philanthropy for making things happen is because there were no funding structures for what I wanted to do. Speaking to your point about creative financing, when you think about how stuff is funded or how research is funded, healthcare is funded usually by, to use the US example, the NIH funds healthcare, the USDA funds agriculture. CELAG is kind of right in the middle because the technology comes from the medical field, but the application is in ag. So you could not convince a medical researcher who has a ton of funding from pharma companies to start looking into culturing cow cells. Why would they want to do that? And then on the flip side, on the ag sector, there's only so many folks in ag that would regularly culture tissue, like do tissue culture. So the facilities are not really set up for this kind of work. So we're really complete gap. And the future of CELAG and what I think is the future of most innovation going forward is all going to occur in these gaps and in these little spaces around these artificial kind of categories that we've created about how science works or how science would be put into buckets. And so we absolutely need the creative financing for exactly that reason, is these kind of pillars don't matter anymore. Like this bioeconomy that is coming can be used to create any biological thing. That blurs the lines between like food and fuel and fiber and all this kind of stuff. So, yes, you can ask your question now.
No, you answered. I didn't have to ask the question. That was self-service. So I want to come back to something Allison, though, said at the beginning of her statement, which is that we're 9 skipped meals away from anarchy. War in Ukraine has been a huge shock for countries that depend on Ukraine as the traditional breadbasket of Europe. And it's not just Ukraine. Ethiopia is experiencing its worst drought in 50 years. There are droughts in Argentina, in Australia, affecting crop production. And I just read yesterday that Brazil has lost 28% of its agricultural land to drought. So in the face of food shortages that aren't just about the fact that, we didn't get our favorite kind of firm tofu, where was the firm tofu for 2 years? We couldn't get our favorite things at the grocery store. We're talking about the potential for a real crisis where people can't just, can't get the food that they need to feed their families. So I don't know who wants to take this question. How do we make our production more resilient in the face of these geopolitical and climate crises?
It takes policy, it takes commitment, and it takes that financing, but it also takes us as consumers demanding safe food, less waste. We ourselves can waste less. But I think it takes a community to drive the change that we need to see. This is a very frightening time. Geopolitical conflict has the potential to shift us into such a polarized place where we stop trading and we start restricting ourselves to our own community. And for Canada, that would be a desperate move. We live to export. We must keep our trade barriers down, and we must ensure that we enable ourselves to be the type of Canadian producer that is required around the world. So we need to remain statesmen.
And Ellen, I see you want to jump in.
I was just going to say that I think our resource base in Canada that has been well described already gives us a responsibility. We owe the world to be able to produce food that we can distribute, as well as the tools to produce food that we can distribute in sustainable ways. One of the papers that Isha's group has written is that they're producing food with a mission. Was that something in the title of the Nature?
Yes, it was called Cultured Meat Needs a Race to Mission, Not a Race to Market.
And that is absolutely true. And that is something that consumers will get behind. Consumers want to feel good about the decisions they're making, and it's really critical that they can identify the good that they're doing with those decisions. Bill?
Yeah, if I can just add. So the panel already knows this is a topic that's very difficult for me to talk about. So I'm a Canadian of Ukrainian descent. My father was from Ukraine. He survived the famine of 1932, 1933 by eating grass. And that had a profound effect on me. When I was living in Switzerland, and Ukraine became an independent country, I did a lot of humanitarian work in Ukraine. I collected lab equipment in Bern and Basel and Geneva and Zurich, used lab equipment, beautiful condition, and I brought it to Switzerland, or to Ukraine, to Lviv and Kiev and Kharkiv. So Ukraine really is the breadbasket of Europe. The soils are just absolutely amazing. Ukraine is in the top 10 for exporting rye and barley and wheat and corn. And this war waged by Russia on Ukraine can't be seen as anything less than a war on civilization. I mentioned the quotation from Thomas Jefferson, soil is the basis of our civilization. And the only reason for the war, just so it's clear to everybody, is Ukraine is a successful democracy. And that's a nightmare for the mad midget in Moscow. And so the Ukrainians will win this war, and they will win the war with the help of civilized countries around the world. And I'm very proud of the support that they're getting from Canada. I wish there was more, so they will win this war. And then they're going to have to rebuild the entire country. Yeah. And the soils are just going to be a mess. I mean, if you know any farmers, you know when they're cultivating their soil, they don't like uneven spots in their fields. What is it going to be like plowing a field that's full of craters? I was reading this morning about a report, 2,000 dairy cattle destroyed in one missile strike. So it's unbelievable, the devastation. And so all of that used lab equipment that I collected many, many years ago, I guess when the war is over and all the Russians are gone, I guess I will restart that. And I'm sure people from around the world will be helping. But I just want to leave you with a quotation from Volodymyr Zelensky for the COP27 meeting. I think he's become the leader of leaders. He said, we can't have a global climate policy without peace. And so that's what has to be achieved.
When we Glazy and Isha, I mean, when we have in our heads the future of agriculture, I think we've often thought of it as a male-dominated economy, which is ridiculous because women have been farmers since the very beginning. But neither of you, I think, fits the traditional profile of a farmer. So how do we get young scientists and researchers like you, who represent the diversity and the future, interested in agriculture, interested in doing agricultural research as opposed to other kinds of scientific research?
You could fund us. That's one idea, but you can take that.
I was just gonna say that, for example, in my case in particular, I like mentioning because one of the issues in agriculture is having people right to work. And I grew up in a big city in Brazil with no agriculture background. So I went to study animal sciences, and then I was fascinated about working with animals and producing food, and I thought that, whoa, that's perfect. So I then had opportunities to do internships and so on, and then start working on the industry, and then I'm completely fascinated about that. So one of the issues that we have is exactly this is less people, and that's not just a Canadian problem. I was recently in the GAZO, which is the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock Production, and everybody that was talking about that was talking about how can we get the next generation to come and work in agriculture, right? Many people, they don't want to do the work anymore. So one of the solutions or suggestions that was mentioned, and that I agreed, that made me think about it, was the implementation of technology in agriculture and the food production. There is a lot of opportunities in the area to bring more people when we implement technology and make things move faster. We need that, right? So that's one of the possibilities that we can have. In the agriculture, in some countries, unfortunately, owning animals is the only thing women can do, right? So they cannot own anything else. They can just own a few chickens or I don't know, a cow. And then livestock production, animal production in general, can contribute to this equality of women be leading and ruling. So we cannot think about sustainability without thinking on animal production and all the contribution it can do to equality, right? And food security and so on. So,
Senator, this is the future
Yes.
of agriculture. And also, definitely, smallholder farms produce about 80% of the world's food. They are predominantly women with unequal access to land, to capital, and to markets. So we have to fix that. But here's a little stat that I'll leave you with great hope. So by 2030, 65% of the wealth in Canada will be controlled by women. So perhaps activating capital of women who traditionally donate and teaching them how to invest is perhaps another way that we can change this. But Bill, you give me such great hope. Your love of the Ukraine and your caring and compassion, I think that's what will take us through. So I have great hope. I think science and technology will drive us very much forward.
Here's my fear. In the last 2 years, we have seen such a backlash against science itself. So much distrust of vaccines, but not just vaccines, of scientific research, of the World Health Organization, of rationalism. And I don't know, I mean, maybe these things ebb and flow, but Ellen, I wanted to throw that question to you first. How, in this sort of new and disturbing spirit of anti-scientism, do we fight back? Do we get people to understand that, I sometimes think it's because we couldn't fix COVID right away. People went, well, if science can't fix this, then science, I guess we have to put our faith in something else. But how do we get people willing to accept the importance of science and technology in this era?
There certainly isn't anything more important or more exciting going forward than the opportunities that we're going to have, both in food and in medicine and in other aspects of the bioeconomy. I don't know where we lost our path. Personally, I was devastated by the backlash against science that became so obvious. And it has to start somehow with children. It has to start with teaching children in some senses. When we think back about recycling, it was children that brought recycling home to their parents and said, didn't work as a good method, but it did inspire recycling behavior. I think to a great extent, children taught us not to smoke. We can educate without indoctrination, but people need to understand that that's what we're doing. And children not exposed to the excitement of the things that are coming forward and that can change in the world is a significant loss. We have to take that very, very seriously. And I'm not seeing that taken seriously enough at the policy levels.
Yeah, and I worry about when you have political leaders who seem to be anti-science.
Or who
where that takes us.
political use of anti-science.
Yes, maybe it's more that would be a fairer way of putting it. How are we doing for time, Chancellor Garritty? Am I supposed to be wrapping it up now? I'm supposed to be wrapping it up now. This is what I feared. All right, so here is the final question. What are we going to be eating 50 years from now, and what won't we be eating?
I think for Christmas dinner, we're probably going to eat the same food. I'm just not sure how it's going to be created or where it's going to be created or how we're going to create it ourselves in our kitchen. But I'll lay you odds, we will still want to see something that looks like possibly turkey, possibly mashed potatoes and gravy, but it will come from different origins.
Bill, what are we eating in 50 years? And what won't we see anymore?
What am I going to be eating in 50 years? I hope I'll be eating in 50 years. So I'm gonna switch streams here a little bit. As I said, I'm just a lowly soil scientist, but I do grow quite a lot of my own food, and in my tiny backyard here in Edmonton. But for the first time in 45 years, I spent the summer at my little farm in Ontario, and I got out my garden tiller that I hadn't used since I was in high school, and I tilled up the barnyard, and oh my goodness, the food was just absolutely amazing. So I'm glad, Isha, that you mentioned the importance of diversity. When I look around Edmonton, I just see a lot of space not being used. And I just think about how much food could be grown in the city. Mm-hmm. I'm amazed what I can grow in my tiny backyard in Edmonton. And my garden in Ontario fed a lot of friends and family. It was amazing. And I'm inspired to do much more of that. As I said, I've been taking very good care of my soil. And the soil rewards us. We take care of the soil takes care of us. And the other reason why this is so important, I think, is it gets back to these micronutrients. You know, soil is much more than just a rooting medium for keeping the plants in place, but that's where the plants are getting all of the copper and the nickel and the zinc and the manganese. So I think these are very nutritious foods that we can grow very easily ourselves, and we don't need a lot of space. And I think that's all part of the diversity. There won't be one solution for our food going forward. There will be many solutions, and growing your own, that's one of them.
Glazy, what are you eating in 50 years?
I hope I steak. I hope that we can have more options, right? But the most important that we can eradicate hunger, right? We can increase food distribution, that everybody has the right to eat well and have all the nutrients we need to perform well and live a healthy life. So not regardless of what we consume, but I think the most important is that food is accessible to everybody. So I hope we're gonna get there.
Isha?
I'm more pessimistic. I feel like what we eat in 50 years is completely dependent on the choices that we make now. And if we kind of continue on the path that we've been on so far, I don't know what our choices would be in 50 years. I don't know if Christmas dinner, like if it would be cold outside at Christmas. I don't know if we would have access to as many animal products, because I feel that system becomes only more precarious the more industrialized it gets, with the antibiotic resistance and viruses and swine fevers and avian flus and all these things that become more prevalent. So I think in 50 years, if we continue as we are right now, we probably will actually have less options for what to eat. Probably will eat more local because of a lack of choice, and might have less access to animal products. But if we make the right investments into diversifying our food system and creating more resilience, so we're able to bounce back from changes in the supply chain, and to really create resilience in a climate change future, which is like the ultimate skate to where the puck is going to be situation, I think we could have a wide diversity of foods, and I don't think it would be just the familiar. I love Ellen's dinner idea. It's the same dinner, but you just, where it came from is different. I also think we could be eating things that are actually unfamiliar to us today. For instance, we always talk about how it's much easier to grow cells in 2 dimensions than in 3. So maybe we're eating like crispy meat is like crispy chip instead of as a steak as we're used to, because meat doesn't have to exist in the paradigm of an animal anymore. Instead, it's how it's cultured. And so I like this idea that in the future we have this abundance, despite all the changes that we're we see coming in the next 50 years, and it's the choice of familiarity plus novelty.
And Allison, bring us home.
So, Builders VC, I'm missing our AGM in San Francisco tonight, but we've just invested in a company called Colossal. And I'd love you to take a look at it. And Colossal is bringing back the woolly mammoth. So my bet is we'll be eating woolly mammoth or similar types of things. But the one thing that I really hope, Senator, is I really hope that whatever I'm eating, every single person around the world has the same access, at the same cost, at the same texture perhaps, but I really hope that everyone has the same access. And thank you. This was a wonderful evening.
Thank you all very, very much. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to especially thank the Chancellor for hosting this wonderful event. Thank you all very, very much.
Apparently, I'm supposed to say good night to everyone. So Stan Blake, Dean of the Faculty of Agricultural Life and Environmental Sciences, thank you for coming. Thank you for the people that are online as well for coming. I think we have seen the future of food discussed tonight, and I'm looking forward to the future as our students and researchers as well. So thank you very much all for coming.
Thank you so much. I think for our guests online that might not have heard Stan, that's Stan Blade at the back, thanking all of us and especially our panel. In my brief time as Chancellor, I continue to be surprised by the remarkable things that I learn at the university, and every time we have one of these conversations like the one this evening. The video which opened tonight's forum showcases but a few of the stories, and I invite you to stay connected with the university to learn more about the things that we're doing. I scribbled 100 notes as I was listening, and it's really hard to sum up my observations. I think I have to say I'm left with kind of a mix of excitement about what's possible, these kind of ideas that you don't think of regularly, a bit of despair about the problems and the challenges that we face and our ability actually to take action to deal with them. And I think also a great deal of impatience that we get on with it and make the right choices, the kinds of choices that you talk about, so that 50 years from now, we're not left in a worse situation where people around the world who are not nearly as fortunate as we are left in horrible circumstances. So I'm going to stay with the hopeful part of it. I'm going to stay with the hope that our children, if we teach them well, will come up with better choices maybe than what we have in the past. So I want to thank all of our panelists, Alison Sundstrom, Bill Shotek, Ellen Goddard, Glazy, did I say that right? Glazy, De Silva, and Isha Datar, and to our moderator, Paula Simons. Thank you so much for a wonderful, wonderful evening. I also want to thank our partners and to everyone who helped make this Chancellor's Forum possible, the Faculty of Agriculture, Life and Environmental Sciences and the Office of the Senate, External Relations, the Arts Resource Center, Campus Food Bank, and all of our volunteer senators. And final thanks to all of you for joining us this evening in person at Augustana campus and online. I hope that we've given you plenty of food for thought. Thank you very much.